Rock creatures, duplicitous scientists, and Klingon clowns with battle-left arms. That can only mean we've got a brand new episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. It's a crazy one. Welcome to Trek Central. I'm your host, Captain Jack, and let's get into it on Star Trek Day. Episode 3 has the alliterative title of Mining the Mind's Minds. An alliterative title, you get my point. It was written by Brian D. Bradley and directed by Fill Marc Sagadraca. Hope I pronounced that right. Honestly, the title's a mouthful, I'm sure you can forgive me. Before we dive into the video, as per usual, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never, and I mean never, miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media, which I would recommend doing today, as it's Star Trek Day, so we're going to have some major announcements. You don't want to miss those. But as always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay? Engage. Now this was actually a really enjoyable episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, with a cool story, some nice twists, and some actual morals benefiting the Star Trek episode. The premise of the episode is that some Federation scientists on a planet inhabited by sentient rock creatures are attacking each other, with the sentient rocks even employing psychic rock mines to bring people's fancies to life, which in turn turns them to stone. The USS Hood is actually the ship responsible for bringing these two groups together, with the Hood being seen not only in the Next Generation, as the ship Riker previously served on, and mentioned numerous times during the series, but also in Deep Space Nine. Well, now it seems it has a new captain, but it's great to see this legacy ship return in the 2380s. It's the Excelsior class, which is still living. Anyway, the USS Cerritos and the USS Carlsbad are here to do their support missions, cleaning up the mines, relocating the scientist base, and getting the two groups to sign off on the peace treaty. Before we start talking a little bit about this episode, we have a new California class, the USS Carlsbad, and in traditional Californian class style, the Carlsbad is named after a city in California of the same name. However, compared to the Cerritos, it seems like the Lower Deckers toe line a bit more, and don't go offline with wild adventures like we've come to love from Lower Decks. This episode runs with the interesting premise of psychic minds, which she desires really well and gives an insight into some of our characters. Rutherford, for example, envisions Leah Brahms, asking him to work with her. If you don't remember Leah Brahms, she is basically the leader in warp field theory and helped with the development of the Galaxy-class starship, with her being seen in the Next Generation. The original actress of Susan Gibney is reprising a role but now in animation, so it's nice to hear her once again. In fact, Leah Brahms is actually returning once again this year in a Star Trek Resurgence comic book. Put that on screen right now, Troy will show you what it looks like. We're excited to review it on TrekCentral.net later in November, I believe is when it releases. In Bournemouth's vision, we have an Admiral on a hoverbike, which has nacelles and looks quite like TOS in style, which is a very nice touch. Anyway, he's asking Bournemouth to help him with the Borg, and even offering help become a captain, something we've known Bournemouth wants to progress through the ranks, but still seeing himself as the sidekick, envisioning him getting into a sidecar and not on equal footing. But the person who is the most interesting is Mariner, considering her vision of Jennifer, which is colourful. Now, if you don't remember, at the end of the last season, Mariner and Jennifer kind of got it together as a couple, but we haven't seen them in the last couple of episodes of Lower Decks. Well, this episode confirms they are still together and they have some sort of relationship which just happened in the background, which I'm not too happy about because I would like to see more of these two on screen. But I know the creators don't really want to focus on relationships, so keeping it in the background is the best way to still have it around but not focus on it or become the focus of it. However, these illusions also become nightmares when the minds break, and again, we get a good look at our characters' fears. Though, I do have to add, if it isn't Mariner who breaks it, and maybe makes things worse, which becomes somewhat of a trope, it's actually Steve Stevens, or Lieutenant Commander Steve Stevens. What is it with the listeners in this episode? Everyone's putting words together for some reason. Hard to pronounce and say these things. Anyway, I have to say an episode like this, which makes what goes on in our characters' heads made real, is a really good way to look at our characters and have that physical threat and something tangible on screen. So it's a good utilization of this story to connect back to character development. The only interesting thing out of the fears, character-wise, apart from the animated series Klingon, Borg Snake, Clown Klingons with battle farms, and Monster Raisin is Mariner's fear or nightmare. It turns out to be a werewolf version of Jennifer who wants to settle down. We get to see Mariner and her fear of commitment in a relationship play out. This has been alluded to before, with Mariner even saying she pushes people away if she likes them, and also outside of relationships, being worried about settling down and being abandoned, because it's happening before her friends and them getting promoted and leaving her. So having a physical representation of that fear made manifest was really cool from a character perspective. Our first twist of the episode is that the first Carlsbad crew actually really like the Cerritos crew, and the Cerritos crew is kind of famous to other Canny-class ships, which is nice to hear from them as some of their famous exploits, which we've watched like the trial episode, or the Packlet attacks. Some shows would mention random things that happen off screen, but actually mentioning episodes that we saw makes even more sense and makes viewers feel more alive. Those events did actually happen and have an impact on other people, not just our crew. The second twist is that in the cave our joint lower deckers hide in, from the nightmares, is a facility with a receiver from the psychic minds, tied up to Federation technology. It turns out that the scientists and rock people have actually been working together, using their joint technology to steal classified information from Starfleet crews, and the whole conflict was actually deployed to get this information, so they could sell it on the black market for their own gain. Very shady. I assume that the rock people have technology to reverse the purification of the mind minds, which is why the scientists were okay with being petrified and why we see Steven survive at the end after being petrified previously. Now the A plot was all about Rutherford, Marin and Boimler on the planet, which is really cool. But our B plot of this episode is focused on Tendi, which if you remember from our review from last episode was really needed, and I really like we got her focus on this episode. The episode does a lot of continuation of story points set up in the Season 2 finale for Season 2. Not only with Marin and Jennifer, but with Tendi on her own path to becoming a senior science officer. Now she meets with Dr. Milegmio, who is with her mentor, and isn't too happy about this because she probably looks down on Milegmio. It's great to see his character again, but I understand her thoughts behind this, especially as he's not trained any science officers before. Yeah. However, one of Milegmio's pieces of advice and something that Tendi should work on is her communication skills, and I think this is actually critically important. It's all well and good knowing what the problem is, or even the solution from a scientific point of view, but you have to be able to communicate that well to a captain or senior officer in a way that can understand it even if they don't know the full science behind it. Again, speak English, not science talk. It's actually a really important life skill of being able to communicate complex situations in a non-complex way. So how we explain Star Trek to you guys in a less complex way. Not only does Tendi get advice from Dr. Milegmio, she, failing miscommunication with the captain, seeks out Dr. Tanana, who we all know is Tendi's true mentor. Tana reminds Tendi that you have to make a mess in order to fix something, especially when you're starting out. You have to fail and make mistakes in order to become better at that thing. Tendi, even almost by herself, communicates the problem to her captain, taking matters in her own hands and quite literally making a mess by smashing a gifted relic. To locate an anonymous reading inside, which is a listening device, which ties into the plot on the ground of our lower deckers discovering the duplicitous plans of the rock people and the science team. The only thing I did not particularly like in this episode was the two captains' behaviour during the episode. They were acting very selfishly, insisting the others should have the relic, which is not entirely becoming, but I suppose if they didn't truly like the treaty, yeah, it's a bit confusing, but you get the point. For some story reason they had to stall there. I just don't think this petty back and forth between the captains was the best way to do it and probably could have done something else. So some final thoughts. Overall, I and the team here really enjoyed this episode, perhaps even viewing it as one of my favourite for Season 3 of Star Trek Lower Decks. If I had a pretty cool story with some interesting twists to it, then some great character exploration for Marin and Tendi specifically. But still, we got to look at some other characters' psyche. It gave us a focus on Tendi for one of the other plot lines, which is really well needed at this point. The environmental work on this episode of the planet actually really cool. I just like the general feel of the episode. It was just good overall, you know? And again, the morals of this episode mainly stem from Tendi, but the lessons of how to communicate complex situations in non-complex ways, and you can't be afraid of failing if you want to get better. There's really good life lessons to learn, so this episode really does nail it Star Trek-wise and giving us some life advice wrapped in sci-fi goodness. Easter egg-wise, this episode is really cool, and even though we got things like the TOS Kukulkan, which is still a pain to pronounce, my favourite might actually be the rock creatures, which I presume might be an Easter egg of the infamous rock creatures from the Star Trek movie. This is definitely the movie, The Final Frontier, with the rock creatures being unfortunately cut from the film, but you can see them on screen in the background shots and the latest HD version of the movie, or in this clip here. What do you think of the episode? Let us know in the comments below. Like always, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. But for now, happy Star Trek Day, I'll see you very soon. I've been Captain Jack. Live long and prosper. Goodbye.